All right, Dave, we're dealing with one of, if not the greatest match in WrestleMania history, the submission match between Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Of course, the famous double turn. Austin comes in as the heel, leaves as the babyface. Hart comes in as the face, leaves as the heel. How did they manage to execute this kind of dynamic? It's damn impressive. I mean, how did they manage to totally switch roles by the end of this match?
Well, there was underlying stuff had been going on in both cases. For Austin, probably for a couple of months, and for Bret for maybe a week or two, where you could feel it was coming. You knew Bret was you knew going in that this was the goal. I mean, it wasn't like they went in there and they did it out of nowhere, and it's like, wow. I knew, I could feel. I don't remember. I think I knew. I pretty much knew. I certainly knew from the Bret standpoint, not from him, but from Brian Pillman, where the Bret thing was going. So I kind of knew what to watch out for. And I think that there was a theme. Is what the people wanted anyway. So it was easier to pull it off because it wasn't. They weren't fighting the people. They were giving the people what they wanted. So that was good. But I mean, you could probably watch today and say that this wasn't the best match in WrestleMania history. That Undertaker and Shawn was probably by today's standards. I mean, in many ways, I think Shawn and Razor was up there, but because we've had much better ladder matches since, match doesn't hold up quite as much if you're watching it now. But to me, the Bret Austin match was the greatest match in WrestleMania because of what it meant, and it was clear to me in the middle of that match. It's like this match. I mean, it's a phenomenal match anyway. And you could just feel again, that Austin was going to be this big star, and this was and especially he lost, he passed out, he was the one bloody. All the things that you wouldn't do to the babyface on the rise is what they did, and it worked. And I mean, you really got to credit. I mean, I know Bret, really had a big hand in putting that match together, including the blood, which of course they couldn't do now. And, I mean, it is, again, it's one of those things where when you look back at Bret Hart's career, I think this is maybe his crowning achievement was not what he did for him, but that he kicked the ball off for Austin. Austin would have been a big star anyway, but I think if anything else, it sped up the process and kicked it off as big as it could be kicked off.
And following that, given the fallout of WrestleMania 13, and let's just speculate, had Montreal not happened, was there ever a plan to have Austin face Bret Hart in a rematch? Was it going to be WrestleMania 14? Was there anything they wanted to do with those two again?
Yeah, I mean, if Bret had stayed, he certainly would have had another run with Austin. When Austin was champion, that he would have lost. Because one of the things when he was talking to Vince was there was a scenario where he would lose a couple of matches. You lose to Shawn, you put your career on the line, then you beat Shawn, then Austin beats you, type of a thing. And Bret heard all those losses, and the money was different. It was among the reasons that he was talking about leaving. But the idea was, he would put over Austin. Again in would have been 98 at that time, yeah.
Now, Dave, with this whole scenario and playing out as it did, it's even more amazing that
because it was never supposed to happen.
Yes, exactly.
That's the thing. I mean, when you think about the Bret Hart Steve Austin match, the most important match in WrestleMania history, perhaps, was the most important match in WrestleMania history after, like I would say, WrestleMania 1 and WrestleMania 3, in my mind. Maybe no, it was more important than Hogan and Warrior long term, without a doubt. I think it's more important long term than Hogan and Savage, even though Hogan and Savage was, Hogan and Savage, Hogan and Warrior on that day were tons bigger matches. But I mean, as far as like really most important match, and you go back, number one, it wasn't the main event, even though everyone remembers it as the main event. It was not. It was meant to be the number 2 match on the card, and it was not the planned match at all. It was because Shawn Michaels had the knee injury, and they needed an opponent. Steve was going to wrestle Davey Boy Smith, and it was just going to be, a win for Steve, I guess, in a prelim match. And again, his turn, would have been delayed and wouldn't have been on as big a stage, and it wouldn't have been as memorable and all that. So it's like one of those weird, timing and luck and fate and everything. I mean, it'd be one thing if you go like, wow, like a year ago, Vince had planned this whole thing out, and what a genius Vince is. This was, I mean, the whole Bret Hart Steve Austin thing was luck. I mean, and again, he still would have been a big star, but it was just luck that match ever happened. I mean, it was a combination of Vince. I think what happened was Vince panicked because business was bad, and when Vince panicked, it was like, because originally it was going to be Shawn against Bret at Mania, and Bret was going to regain the title. That had been the plan when from when Bret re-signed to come back, because Bret was a free agent. He was getting the offers from both sides, and WCW made the bigger offer, and Vince made the 20-year contract thing, and you all know how that turned out. Mm-hmm. And one of the scenario was, Bret, you come back. Shawn was, the TV ratings were down, and even though Vince thought that Shawn was a bigger star than Bret at that point, they were losing with Shawn at the helm. So Vince thought maybe Bret was the bigger star. So it's like, okay, Bret, you're going to win the title at Mania. So they were going there, and then before Mania, Vince is just panicking, and he just goes, we got to get it back on the big guys. So he had Shawn lose to Sid Vicious, and then Sid Vicious lose to Undertaker. That was the idea. Then Shawn, the day he was supposed to lose to Sid Vicious, comes in and says, my career's over, my knee's shot, and I'm vacating the title on a live television special.
Yeah.
And
he didn't lose the title. He lost his smile.
He lost his smile. And so Bret had no opponent, and Steve was in a nothing match, so they went in there. And then Bret was the one who has, God, I'm complaining Bret. Bret was the one who recruited Shamrock, who was the referee. So with Shamrock, they made it the I Quit match. It also would have just been a normal match. It was the idea of, we got this submission guy, so we're going to do an I Quit match. And it all, it's like all these things were, the recruiting of, they wouldn't have done an I Quit match if it wasn't for Shamrock. The tie-in with Shamrock. They wouldn't have done the match anyway if Shawn hadn't left. Yeah, I mean, it's all, everything about that match was a complete fluke. But it turned out to be, again, the most historically significant match in WrestleMania since Hogan Andre, I think.
I'm afraid, Dave, it's come to the point where we have to ask you about the subject you were asked about more than any other. It strikes me that there is no better WrestleMania to shoehorn in, the Montreal discussion than this, WrestleMania 13, because this would be Bret Hart's final WrestleMania appearance before coming back and doing the gimmick match with Vince McMahon, of course, all those years later. So this is one of the most talked about, one of the most covered and sort of mythologized things to really ever happen in the business. And I just want you to tell us, and recollect for us, because that's the spirit of this whole thing, recollect for us your feeling in November of this year when it ends as it did for Bret Hart. I mean, we've chronicled his rise through the ranks, through WrestleMania. We talked about his crowning achievement moment up on the shoulders of everybody at WrestleMania 10, Vince McMahon himself in the ring, sort of glowing at the prospect of Bret now finally ensconced as his champion, and it ends as it does. I mean, you're just memories of taking that in.
So much. I mean, I was watching them. I mean, I was aware that things were happening, and I was aware of what the finish was going to be, which was DQ, and it didn't happen, and I'm watching this, and it just looked fishy, and they rushed off the air, and I can't say I knew that it was a double cross, but I mean, I thought that, I wonder, you know what I mean? And then, I mean, the second that show's over, I get a phone call from someone who's not in the business, and just goes, that was a double cross. It was the Gorgeous George Don Eagle thing, which it was very similar with the referee running away and everything. Gorgeous George Don Eagle. And it's like, I'm vaguely familiar with Gorgeous George and Don Eagle. And it's like, oh, maybe, or Moolah Richter, which wasn't brought up, but I remembered Moolah Richter as well. But then, like seconds later, I get a phone call, and this is from someone in the WWE. It was one of the wrestlers there. It was Doug Furness, and he was furious. And and by then I'd figured out what it was, and I go, I know what happened. He goes, you don't know what happened. And I go, I know what happened. They double crossed him. He goes, you don't know the half of it. He was just furious. He's going like, Brett's son is crying. I'm looking right at him. He's crying. This was horrible. This was the worst thing they've ever done. Bret, was this, and this. Brett's the model guy. We all looked up to him. This was, and the whole thing. And then that night there was one person after another, and they're all wanting to quit, which didn't happen. Nobody quit, other than Mick Foley did. I mean, Mick Foley did quit. I give him, I don't know if it's credit, but he did quit. I mean, Brett told everyone not to quit, and Rick Rude, Rick Rude ended up kind of double crossing Vince, right after. But for the most part, it was what it was. Owen went home. Owen was in a terrible position. That's all, on that. But yeah, and then so everybody was talking about that night, and then I think it was actually Tuesday, not Monday, because Brett and I were not friends by any means. We had mutual friends, but he hated me, and there were I guess several people go, you need to talk to Dave on this one, and he was like, no, not gonna. And then finally it's like, you need to talk to him. So I talked to him. We talked for a long time. And I had already talked to people from WWE all day that Monday, with their side of the story. And, so I mean, this encompassed my life for probably the next 3 weeks. And in many ways, I mean, it was the biggest, the second biggest story I ever covered, because the biggest story by far was the Chris Benoit thing. But it was the second biggest story I ever covered. The subscriptions to the Observer went through the roof, like unbelievable during this period, because, everybody was wondering, like, what the hell happened? And, and it's funny because at that time, I mean, I don't want to say that I had good relations with WWF, because it's always never was what I would call good, but they were better than they ever were at any time then. So, and I think maybe Brett understood that, or maybe he didn't even know that. But, I mean, the deal was Brett had a contract, and his contract gave him creative control. And when, I heard everyone's side of the story, even though I heard from, I mean, the wrestlers did back Brett at first, although Vince managed to talk a lot of them out of that a couple of days later. But, I'm hearing Brett tell me his side, and I'm hearing these guys and tell him the side. And the key thing was, Vince's thing that he told everyone was that Brett refused to do the job for anyone. He wasn't going to do business on the way out, which I thought would have been wrong. And when I talked to Brett, he was in so much detail about what it was, and that he never refused. And then I did get the tape of the conversation, some of which was in the movie Wrestling with Shadows. But I got the tape, the unedited. I know, and this is again, how many times has a wrestler gone into a conversation with Vince McMahon wired? Probably it's the only time in history. And Vince didn't know it. And so there's an actual tape of the conversation. And Brett never said he wouldn't do the job. And Vince never once asked him to do the job. So that's when it was like, okay. I mean, it's just like, if he'd asked and Brett said, I will not, if he had said, I will not lose the title, I'm going to WCW, I want to vacate it. And he did say he wanted to vacate it the next day, but he was also open to, I mean, they had the agreement in place that he was going to lose it at the next pay-per-view. I mean, they were talking about it in there, and, Brett did talk about, well, do you really want to do that? Everybody knows I'm leaving anyway. And I think Vince already, look, Gerald Briscoe had already gone into Sean's room the night before and practiced, getting out of wrestling holds with Sean in case Brett attacked him. So they already knew what they were doing before this conversation. But Vince was, whatever Brett said, Vince was, yeah, I agree, because he's just trying to lower Brett's guard or whatever. He'd already made up his mind what he was going to do. Because again, he never asked. He was just like, okay, Brett, we're down to here. What are we going to do? And he goes, what do you want to do? And then Vince goes, I think I see a DQ. You win on a DQ, you get your hand raised. Do you want to hit China or do you want to not hit China? I mean, because that'll get a big pop, but do you want to hit China? That was the big discussion. And he was like, yeah, I think it's okay if I hit China, for the big pop at the end. So that was Vince gave him the option of like, do you want to hit the girl or not hit the girl? And he said, I'll do it, for whatever, that's what he said. So that's the basic deal. It didn't need to happen. I mean, again, it ended up for Vince. I mean, who would have thought? When that happened, I thought, God, who could ever trust Vince? And Vince was losing at the time. And I thought that this might, I totally misread this one. I thought this might be the nail in Vince's coffin. Not the nail in his coffin. I didn't think he was going out of business. But I thought it was the nail in his coffin in the sense that getting Brett, as hot as Brett felt coming off of this thing, that they were going to go so far ahead that now, I mean, Vince was already pretty far behind, but that this was going to be, insurmountable, and that they would be in the position WCW had been in for all those years, where they're a distant number two. I thought that was going to happen, and Austin got real hot. Mike Tyson came in. I think it was Austin, Mike Tyson, and then of course the capper was Vince playing off of this thing, became Mr. McMahon, and those three things changed the face of wrestling. They still would have gone with, had none of this happened, they still would have gone with Austin. I mean, with Austin and Tyson. So they were going to gain a lot of ground anyway. It didn't, and they were turning around with the Austin Tyson thing. It was getting closer. And Austin would have been as every bit as big. This didn't help Austin. Although, Vince as the opponent for Austin, I guess it made him stronger in some ways, but Austin still was going to be a big deal. But it did change the face of wrestling completely, in the sense of the Vince McMahon character and the heel authority figure, and everything that was so novel at the time, even though Eric was doing it as well, but it was novel because Vince was such a great performer. And we're still seeing it now, and it's hardly novel, 17 years later.
Dave, I need to ask this question, or it will forever bother me. And it's kind of relevant, as this is WrestleMania 13 was Sid's second and last WrestleMania main event. But I have to go back to WrestleMania 8 because we missed talking about this, or missed asking this question. Was Sid kicking out of Hogan's leg drop at the end of WrestleMania 8 a shoot?
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to happen. It was supposed to be a run-in. It was supposed to be a run-in, and he wasn't supposed to kick out. But the guy got there late. Whether that was by design from Sid and Harvey Whippleman or whatever, it was Pop Shango, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or he just got there late, and Sid had no choice, and he was thinking on his feet. I couldn't tell you.
All right.
Sid would be the person to, on that. But there's the theories that they told him to come late so he could kick out. But he did the right thing, because it wasn't supposed to be a pinfall, and the guy wasn't there. So, I mean, Sid wasn't unprofessional. Sid was thinking on his feet.
Yeah.